welcome back to the Integrative Health Podcast with Dr. Jen. We're going to have a really good episode today. We are here with Leona Hernandez. She is an author. Her and her husband, Tony Hernandez, wrote the book, Travel Nurse, Our Pandemic Story. When Tony and Leona first learned about the outbreak of a novel coronavirus in Wuhan, China, their family had just recovered from a flu-like illness with mystery symptoms. As SARS-CoV-2 spread throughout the world, hospitals in New York City were pushed to the brink of capacity and desperately needed ICU nurses. In the midst of an unprecedented national lockdown and mass contagion of fear, Leona signed up to be a travel nurse. She worked in COVID-19 ICUs in hospitals in New York City, Florida, and California. By the end of her last contract, Leona started to question whether public health policies were causing more harm than good. She began to research the most pressing questions of the pandemic, and we'll get into that during the interview. Welcome, Leona. So happy to have you.
Thank you, Dr. Jen. I'm honored, honestly, to be here with you. I love your Instagram page and all the data you share there, and your podcast as well. I've listened to several episodes and grateful to be able to talk with you.
Yes, thank you. And Leona reached out to me on social media, and I'm like, I would love to read your book, have you on my podcast, support you and your, basically this platform, your story. And we were just talking off the podcast about this, and I met some travel nurses that have told me crazy stories about what they've seen. And this is really not getting out. And you've probably got like punished for speaking out about this a little bit, right? Has this affected you and your family at all?
It certainly affected us and still does on a very, very personal level with people we personally know, starting right away in 2020 and then continuing, especially through the mRNA mandates. So that was kind of the first where things were really starting to affect us. And then, to be honest, I maybe should have asked you before, there are some sort of fishy things that have happened that I think, honestly, Tony and I need to discuss about how much like we will or won't share publicly. So that's something we need to talk about. But there have been some interesting sort of fishy things with jobs and all that. But on a personal level, definitely, even right away from the beginning. And we can talk a lot. I'd love to talk about like the medical and health aspect of this, but right away in the beginning, Tony looked into as much as he could about this virus and right away was thinking this has probably already been seeded through the world. And so a 2-week shutdown, it is not going to somehow prevent a likely airborne virus from spreading, but it is going to cause harm. And right away was talking about some of the economic harms. And there was a lot of pushback from that. People saying things like, you can't care about money over lives. And that's absolutely true. However, we need to be rational in situations like this and realize like now, I think it's Oxfam International has shared that actually more people are going to die from starvation due to the lockdowns and the economic impact globally than from the virus itself. And so that's a compassionate viewpoint to think about the actual effects of public health policies rather than just, jumping on board. And I want to give the benefit of the doubt to people who did just kind of implicitly trust whatever public health said or whatever governor said. But the reality is we need to have rational discussions and talk about the effects of these things. Are they going to be effective? Are they going to cause harm? Are they going to cause more harm than the virus themselves?
Absolutely. And what about depression, suicide? I mean, that we know we have data on that the pandemic pushed that outcome. And we have kids that are now just not developmentally okay. And yeah, not even to talk about the mRNA and what's coming out about that. I mean, the actual lockdown and working in hospitals, it was so weird. It was especially weird for me because I'm like, oh, I know how to treat these people at my office. And I treated people all around Ohio. And I remember talking to this one family and their mother had she already was having trouble breathing, already kind of on a non-rebreather as needed. And, we cut some peptides on board, peptides that they were using in China. And there's studies on this. It's not like the stuff I was doing didn't have research. It did,
Right.
but we were like not allowed to use this stuff in the hospital. Like, no, you can't use, IVM in the
Yep.
hospital. So it's like we would send these people away and be like, oh yeah, you're positive and there's nothing you could do. Wouldn't even suggest supplements to these people. Nothing, not even like budesonide, Pulmicort, which we know would calm down that inflammation. Would literally just send them home. And then like when I would
Oh,
work in the ER, I would see that they were seen when they would come in on respiratory distress. I would see, oh, you were seen 7 days ago and sent home with nothing. And
exactly.
yeah, and I think that like it like shook me. And I also did a little bit of telemedicine just because people were staying home and I felt like it was my duty. Like that, like it was like Christmas. I was seeing people like, 2020 when it was the lockdown. And I was like seeing these people and we were able to, as doctors, get licensed in different states, which I'm sure you were allowed to, reciprocity. And I talked to this one girl and I'll never forget. She was so depressed. She was locked in lockdown in her apartment in New York City for months without seeing anyone else. And she had family in New York. So anyway, okay, I felt like I had to just have a therapy session there, Leona. I'm sorry. So
Oh,
let's
right.
start. I'm like, I need therapy from COVID too. Oh. But seriously, healthcare workers, we were not okay what we went through. So
Right.
tell us like how this started. So you just looked at your husband and you're like, I'm going to sign up for a travel nurse. And I know nurses' hearts, and they never blame a nurse for like the outcome of any of this COVID stuff or people weren't allowed into the hospital. It is administration. Nurses have hearts of gold. They really do. And I know that because I work with nurses. I've worked in the ER. I mean, there's nothing like bonding than working in an ICU with a nurse or an ER.
Yes, I feel that way about doctors and providers I've worked with as well. So we lived in Minnesota when the shutdown started, and I was home with at the time we had 3 kids, and I was home with them. I had been for just a few months. It was new that I had resigned from my job, was home full time, and my husband owned a small business that thankfully was doing well, but it was shut down with the state lockdowns. And right away, I said, I feel like I should be working. And he said something like, I'm really glad that you're not working right now. But that was kind of in my head. And then after only a few days, we were talking about the fact that we were going to run out of money if one of us didn't start working somewhere soon. And it really was because of Governor Cuomo in New York. We don't really have regular TV, but we'll watch news clips on YouTube afterwards. And so it was a clip from him asking for ICU nurses. And my background was in the ICU. Like I said, I knew that we needed money. My husband was home anyways because he had to be. And I did actually look at him and was like, I think I should go. And we prayed about it. We talked about it a little bit, but from the time I called the recruiter to the time I was given and accepted the offer was a very short period of time. So it was a pretty quick decision to go to New York City and that was April 2020.
Did your whole family move with you?
No, my very first contract was 8 weeks and I went alone. My husband and kids stayed back in Minnesota. And afterwards, I thought I was done. My kids were pretty young and I just thought I can't be away from them longer than that. However, a lot of them traveled with continued to travel, but this time took their families with. So at that point, as much as the mainstream wasn't really sharing this, most in healthcare were realizing, like, this can be horrible for some people, but likely our children will be okay. Likely our spouses will be okay. Things like that. So there was more acceptance of going to work in the COVID ICU and then coming home to family. So my husband, kids, and I all went to South Florida then, and I worked there. And then we all went to Southern California, and that was my third and final contract. And they were with me for those ones.
Oh, that's good. Well, but I bet you it was a little bit more stressful having them there because you're bringing home stuff and sometimes there isn't enough supplies. Like, do you actually for the fit test, do the N95s fit you? I always fail my fit test.
So yes, like the small, the turquoise one, the small
Yes.
3M, that one pretty consistently fits me well.
Good.
Uh, I had that. I felt like, yeah, that I had that. And there was, a part of me that thought this is a little strange to come home. However, when my first and my third were little babies. I took care of kids with influenza in the peds ICU all the time and came home, to them right after that. And pregnant, we had a lot of kids with CMV, and which can be really dangerous for unborn babies. And, so it wasn't necessarily new to be around these contagions that are dangerous for my children. But yes, you're right. A different level of stress to have them there. I was glad they were there, but yes, added stress as well.
Yeah, I would just derobe right outside the house in my underwear and then just like go in and shower. And I would wear like a cap so I wouldn't have to wash my hair every day. And I wasn't full time in the ER, but I was working more in the ER than I am now. And
Where
yeah, and the other thing, well, but I would never fit test right for anything. And it was almost a relief when we all got COVID because I was like, cool, like we're good.
yeah,
I remember when my parents got COVID for the first time and I was like, they made it, they're okay. So what were there differences between the states? Because, oh my goodness, New York versus Florida and then California, do you feel like it was really different or one was just more of a crap show?
so the biggest differences for me is that in New York, literally everyone I took care of was positive SARS-CoV-2. Everyone. In Florida, it was about 50-50. So some nights I was in COVID ICUs, other nights I was in ICUs with nobody who had COVID. Sometimes I even floated to med surg, people who did not have COVID. So that was kind of a different view of the pandemic. I took care of a number of people who were elderly, but previously very healthy, and then were dying from failure to thrive. And in looking through the charts, and then with one person in particular who I wrote about in the book, I talked to her son, and it really was heartbreaking. She was active, healthy, independent, and then with the lockdowns, her family, said like, "We're not going to see you, Ma. Like, we love you. We don't want to make you sick." And she pretty quickly just died, stopped eating, and died completely alone. Family couldn't come see her. I held her hand as she died. So that was kind of the other side. So in New York, I saw this virus. In Florida, I saw somewhat the virus and somewhat our pandemic response to the virus, and how that was also causing harm and death. And then in California, again, this is just my individual experience based on the timing, but when I got to California, that was the first time I cared for people who were receiving remdesivir. And so in Florida and New York, it was early enough in the pandemic that we weren't giving that. And at the time, this, but monoclonal antibodies were around, but remdesivir was the only treatment for COVID that had full FDA approval at this time. So this was the end of 2020 into the beginning of 2021. Every single person I cared for in the COVID ICU in California had already received remdesivir. And during my 13-week contract, so a decent amount of time, all but one person in the COVID ICU died. It was a much higher rate of death in the COVID ICU than I saw in either Florida or New York. And that was shocking. And other travel nurses I was with also had already traveled to other COVID ICUs. And we were all saying, like, we saw a lot of death before. Why is everybody dying here? The demographic wasn't vastly different, especially between Florida and California. Many people were Latino, many immigrants. Like, that wasn't very different between Florida and California, but everyone, like I said, except one, were dying. And this wasn't just, I don't just mean my patients, I mean in the whole COVID ICU.
And what were they dying of? What was the common?
Kidney failure, yes. And so I did ask a couple doctors, and I remember one in particular, I said, "Do you think that the remdesivir is causing more harm, or do you think the remdesivir is killing people?" I'm not quite sure how I worded it. And he was like, it's FDA approved. So he's like, they wouldn't approve it if it wasn't safe. And I think he said something like, maybe it's not helping, but it definitely wouldn't be approved if it wasn't safe. And I think you've maybe been awake to this longer than me. My husband certainly has. But for me, that just like, it really did shake me to my core. Like, this is wild that this, I'm sure, compassionate and intelligent doctor before me is seeing all of this death and is just convinced if the FDA approved it, it's safe. Like, we don't need to question.
Yeah. Well, they're not questioning, they're not pushing back on hospital administrators. Like, why are we just using something that, doesn't really make sense, with how the disease progresses. Why aren't we doing things early? Why aren't we doing early treatment to reduce that viral load? Why aren't we giving things at the proper time? Like, we shouldn't give steroids right away. We should wait a couple, 7 days in. And I think what the pandemic did for me is realize that, like, doctors aren't free thinkers anymore. We talk about schools being indoctrinated, and you told me that you homeschool your kids. So we talk about schools being, indoctrinated and, like, not free thinkers. And then doctors are starting to be this way. And I've lost respect for a lot of a lot of doctors that trained me, because they were just literally not reading stuff on their own during the pandemic. And I remember I would sit on my couch, we would have the news on, because we were all fear paralyzed at this point. Now I just refuse to watch the news at all. And
Nice.
I would just read and read and read and read about botanicals, read about drugs on the World Health Organization essential medication lists,
Like,
yeah, like I'm not a horse, right? Okay. So it's laughable at this point, but it's not, because people died. Like, we have someone, in my husband's family, out of respect, I won't give details on who, but who could have been saved. I know in my heart. And it just wasn't my place. I told my husband, I'm like, we need to get in there and help him. And it just wasn't my choice. And
um,
it breaks my heart, and it haunts me about all these people that were just misled. And we have to start realizing that we have to do our own research. And it's not information if you're reading from PubMed, and then also free thinking, and then also talking to doctors that are like, we're using this and it's working. It's not going to get FDA approval for that specific thing. That takes 10 to 20 years. We don't have that. But your book, like, you have 250 citations in there. I mean, you read the research. So after that was your last stint, right? As a travel nurse in California, were you just couldn't do it anymore because of what you were seeing, or what happened after that?
I will answer that. Can I just say two quick things about what you
Yeah.
said? So a couple things. I think I don't ever said anything like anti-doctor or disrespectful, but I'm sure to some it seems that way. But one
No.
thing, I absolutely think that we need to hold accountable our regulatory bodies and seriously question them. I in every way, in my mind and my heart, what I actually want is doctors. When I see a doctor like you, I actually want the expertise and the knowledge and the mind and heart of that doctor. I want to know what they think is best for me, is best for my child. What I don't want or need, because it's really shoved in our faces, is someone who is intelligent and smart, who is just parroting what these regulatory bodies are saying. And so I want people to see that distinction, because it's very important, because it's not that I want to, be done with all, or think that I don't need a doctor, or my children will never need a doctor, or anything like that. But I really want doctors and other providers to be more empowered to do the things that you're saying. You use your brain and your heart, which you have, and that's awesome. And use it to look at this data and look at the individual before you and decide what is best for their health, because all of us will be healthy if the individuals who you see in your practice are healthier. So that's just one quick thing. And then,
Yeah.
oh, whenever you get to read it, I would love, love, love to know your honest opinion about the part in the book that we wrote about the medication that starts with I. Should I not say it? Are we going to be censored?
Yeah, I
About
wouldn't
the
say. Just say
remdesivir.
IVM.
About
Yeah.
so IV remdesivir, because I think it's really important to know. I'm not a provider. I can't tell someone that in every case IVM is going to be perfectly effective when SARS-CoV-2 is involved. But what I want people to know is exactly how remdesivir was approved. So the FDA used 3 studies. They were very, very weak studies, and they ignored some much stronger studies that showed that remdesivir A is not effective against SARS-CoV-2, and B is deadly in many cases. Obviously, not all, but that it can cause not just kidney failure and liver failure, but death from that kidney failure. And people need to know that, because it like we already covered. It received full FDA approval, and people assume then that it is safe and effective. And if you look at the actual studies, it's really quite the opposite. So at the very least in this discussion, which is so politically charged with IVM, people need to recognize that IVM has been safely used for decades. And yes, there are some studies showing it's not effective against SARS-CoV-2. There are many studies showing it is, but in the same way, there are studies showing that remdesivir is not effective, and that remdesivir, different than IVM, it can also be very unsafe and even deadly. And so I think it's really important for people to understand that that's how our regulatory bodies might work. They might completely demonize IVM and act like it's only for horses, which is absurd, while giving full approval for another drug that's not effective and is unsafe. And so it's an important thing to see. And that's one thing I wanted to document in the book.
Yeah. And medicine got political. And I remember I looked at my husband. I'm sure you and your husband had to have this conversation. And I'm like, I have to do the right thing. I took an oath. I need to see people and treat them with what the evidence shows is safe. And even though you're using it off label, I would give everyone informed consent that I was using it off label but that it was a safe medication. Just can't give it with Coumadin. That will affect the INR. But
Which
if
are so important. Like that's why you and having that knowledge and people getting these medications with a prescription from their doctor is so important. But that's why I wish I had more doctors like you looking at that evidence and wanting to treat people and looking at those, are you on Coumadin, for example, and being aware of that. Sorry.
Yes. And then I know hydroxychloroquine, that was big too. That one had more side effects. And now we don't really use that as much because, it's still SARS-CoV-2 is still floating around. And we're still, I'm seeing a lot of long haulers and I see a lot of mRNA injuries and all of that. But the thing with medicine became political, and it made me rethink my entire medical school education, just everything. And it was sad. I mourned a little bit. I'm like, well, I will never get along with some of these doctors anymore. And I'm just different. I'm like a black sheep now, but it matters. Like the stories matters, and the individuals that I've helped have mattered. And usually the people that come to my brick and mortar, they've been everywhere. And I never would tell a patient not to see a conventional doctor. I actually recommend them to. I'm like, the more testing, the more minds, in the game, the better. But I will tell you, they never call me back. Only one doctor has called me back to talk about a patient because they find out I'm integrative medicine and they don't call me back. And then they lie to the patients and they're like, oh, I'll talk with your integrative doctor. They have my cell phone and my phone it doesn't ring. It doesn't ring. But anyway, I digress. But this is how medicine is political. It's these insurance companies, it's these big hospitals, it's big pharma. It's not about the patient. And this just became blatantly obvious. But the other dangerous with that, post-pandemic, now people, they just are looking for information about their health from anywhere, from social media, TikTok, and that's dangerous too. So it's so hard. And like you said, you're never gonna, be like dog a doctor or, anything like that. But I think some doctors need a wake up call and they need to be bold. I mean, it's just very interesting. I'm sure with your position, you have more people coming out of the woodwork and they're like, thanks for being brave. And I wish I could talk about this, but they're scared, right? They're scared of the repercussions.
Yeah. And I still feel that way too. Like I wish I wasn't so affected, but unfortunately so many of the things that people have said really do play in my mind, like conspiracy theorists about like the fact that the virus probably wasn't natural. That one I'm like, well, whatever, I can handle that. But being called a murderer for thinking that kids should be in school, like I don't know why that stings so much, but it really does. And it continues to the point where anytime I do something that I know people might disagree with, I really do have to like put on my big girl pants. And so I have some empathy, and I don't know if you feel that way. You seem like truly fearless, and I work to be that way, but I'll be honest that I have to really work up my courage, and I will continue to do so, but I have to do that. It's not just like, oh, whatever, I've got this. Like I'll speak truth in any situation, so it does.
Yeah. It's so hard. And that really stings this week. We've had some things going on, and it was a direct repercussion of speaking out against the truth. And, it does probably hurt my family a little bit, but I pray about it. I pray about it when I'm going to be bold, and I know I'll be protected. And that's really all we can do, because there's so much evil right now, and the spiritual warfare is wild right now. And I didn't really mean to like be bold about this stuff, and I still try to be cautious and careful because I want the information to come out. But doing the right thing and standing up for the right things, I just don't see any negatives in that. And your family and your kids will grow up just knowing to be bold and be strong. Because unfortunately, I don't know, the pandemic was just out of control. I mean, the fear and the damage that has done to people's emotional well-being is just so sad. I want to switch subjects a little bit and talk about like the ventilators, because I know you talk about that in your book. And what did you see in the ICU? So for everyone like out there listening, ICU nurses, I mean, Leona's she would get the sickest of the sickest. That's where they go. They're gonna go to the ICU. And if they weren't intubated in the emergency room, they're gonna be intubated in the ICU. And that was the most dangerous part of transmission, is intubating, because you're getting in there and you're getting all those secretions and stuff. So, I mean, those are the bravest people signing up for the ICU, for those rotations and assignments.
Directly with the secretions of a
Mhm.
person. So when I worked in New York, the hospital that I was in, the day that I got there, they had 14 ICUs with all people with the same virus.
Wow.
And I mean, crazy. Um, Everyone who was scheduled to begin a travel contract after me was actually canceled. So I basically started at the very end of the worst peak, is my understanding. And I think that's accurate. So like truly, if
Okay.
I had been start the next day, they would have canceled me. Like, nope, we don't need any more travel nurses. Um, when I got there, almost everyone already was intubated. So I did not see a lot of people coming in and needing intubation. I was primarily caring for people who already were intubated. So I personally, thankfully, did not see preemptive intubation. I saw some other horrible things that I think were in direct violation of medical ethics and were not humane. But I personally did not see anyone who was who was doing well and then was like sedated and then intubated, which I think some people did see. I'm not questioning the experiences of other people, especially those who started prior to April 15th. That's when I started, April 15th, 2020. I think those who started at the very beginning of April saw more of that like major surge of people coming in, and perhaps then there was some preemptive or perhaps not necessary intubation. Um,
Can you
but I
talk about the unethical things you saw? Can you give some examples of those?
Yes, definitely. So the first we touched on a little bit, but I just want to say one more thing in terms of not treating people and just basically sending them home and hoping, and then next thing they're coming into the ER in respiratory distress or perhaps even failure. And then really don't, there's not a whole lot we can do at that point, especially then. I mean, we really didn't have a lot of treatment, especially for that late stage of the virus. So that was heartbreaking. And what really did not make sense is this juxtaposition of, we are not going to treat you with anything. It doesn't matter how old you are, how many comorbidities you have. We're just going to send you home and hope and pray. Maybe pray if we pray. We're going to send you home and hope. At the same time, we're going to keep perfectly healthy children home from school in the hopes of somehow mitigating the spread of this airborne virus, which is already spreading. So those two things together made no sense. Somehow this virus that's already airborne and spreading around is so bad that we don't care that we're going to harm children by keeping them out of school, keeping people out of churches and synagogues, closing down AA meetings, but keeping liquor stores open, all these weird things that we were doing that harmed and
So
killed.
weird.
We're,
Closing
we're
the gyms. Yeah.
accept closing gyms. We're going to accept the harm because the virus is so bad. But at the same time, the virus is not so bad that we're going to try treating you with a medication that's been used for decades safely in humans. So I that's another thing that I really hope that all of us, myself included, realize and remember going forward, we have to recognize these very strange, inhumane inconsistencies and speak out against them if they happen again. So, I mean, that's one thing, but that's really before getting to the ICU. But it to know that that was going on. So in
Yeah,
the ICU,
and real quick, sorry, just to remind people, we found out that kids they're not the super spreaders.
right,
They're
hold the,
not.
right,
Yeah,
yeah,
so yeah, that was the whole thing
right.
too. But
But in the ICU, so I came out of my patient's room, so I'm taking off in New York, we just wore surgical masks on the floor. So I'm taking off my N95 and my face mask and my gown. And I'm hearing a few nurses or a few people, I didn't know who for sure yet, at the nurses station, throwing out different numbers. And it sounded like they were betting on something. And so I finished taking off my personal protective equipment and wash my hands and walk over. And it was one provider and a few nurses, and they're watching the patient monitor, which we have at the nurses station. And they're watching someone die slowly. And it was pretty clear from the EKG and the oxygen. And sure enough, they were casting bets on how quickly this person would die. And the first thing I thought was, I really hope they're not alone. Like, I hope that the person who's dying, that their nurse is at least with them in the room. And so I walked by the room, and on this unit, thankfully, we had all of the rooms just had huge, clear, open doors so we could see. Woman's in there totally alone, hooked up to her ventilator, tons of drips, multiple IV pulls, completely alone. So I'm not very discreet, and I blush if I'm nervous. So I'm sure I turned bright red behind my surgical mask, but I asked, hey, can I just go in that room and be with her? And they were kind, but they said something, and this is in my book, but they were like, she's going to die really soon, right? Like, there's not, that she's DNR, right? And I said, yeah, I know. Like, I'm not going to try to, resuscitate her, but I'm just going to be with her. And they were like, okay, fine. So put on my gear again and literally just held this woman's hand. She had pictures of her grandchildren in there, and, just you're alone because the hospital's keeping your family away. Like, your family, I assume your family wants to be here with you. I have no idea what she heard, if she heard anything, but just told her, I'm a nurse here. I'm just going to hold your hand, and just held her hand as she died. But I had never, ever seen something like that. And it already, I knew that it would be awful to see people dying without any loved one present. It never even occurred to me that in an extremely well-staffed ICU, I mean, extremely well-staffed, clearly these nurses were just sitting there betting. They were not really, but it's different if you literally can't be there because you're saving someone else's life. That's
right.
a difference. That is not what was happening on this shift.
And there was a lot of stigma around people that got COVID, like, oh, they probably didn't get the V, or they did this to themselves. And, you got this like hate in people, like, and oh yeah, the alone stuff. Like when we could only, they would start to like, oh, they could have one visitor, but yeah, in the ER, like people would be going through crazy things like miscarriages, and I'm like, they're with them because their family member can't come back. It was just totally out of control. And how is that legal? How is that legal? Oh, so this person that you live with, so they probably have, the virus too. They can't be in the room with you.
that's the other, and
The
probably,
ethical. Yeah. Mm-mm.
and yeah, so that, just really, really sad. So, to me, a violation of just basic human ethics, like, how do we treat a human? This is an individual, irreplaceable human who is dying. At the very least, hold their hand or call their family, so at least their family can talk to them on the phone if the hospital's not letting anyone in. But then also the doctor-patient relationship, going back to how we treat someone in the beginning before they're that sick, and just a violation of that doctor-patient relationship. And then I would say, I can't say for certain I necessarily saw this in my first two contracts, but in California, I really do question whether do no harm was being violated every single day, with remdesivir just being given to everyone. Nobody given consent on the fact that this can be dangerous and even fatal, and may not even help your loved one against this virus. I do not think any of that informed consent was given. I'm honestly not even sure these well-intentioned providers knew any of that themselves. And I
Right.
fully fault them when was a pandemic. It was very busy. I get that, but we need to recognize that these regulatory bodies cannot be implicitly trusted.
Right. Back to the being alone. I was just thinking, I bet you though, part of this, because what's everyone's worst fear? Dying alone.
Yeah,
So it was probably like a mind manipulation that they were trying to do to push certain things that they were just like, oh, if you get it, you're just going to die alone in the hospital. I mean, which is just, I mean, it's just so disgusting on so many, these BS hospital visitor, protocols that they would have going on. Oh my gosh. And let's talk about like pregnant women, how they like were not allowed to have doulas into the hospital
which is not
and they were
evidence-based.
and they were
Better
separated from their babies.
insane.
Yeah. It's
Another
just
real quickly with ICU, because these humane aspects are unbelievably critical, but I also just want to bring up one sort of medical or health aspect. First of all, I do think that in New York, most of the doctors and nurses I worked with really were working hard and doing their best. I do think that. But prior to the pandemic, granted, I worked in a pediatric ICU, but I never saw a case of VAP, ventilator associated pneumonia, ever. All of us as an entire unit did a wonderful job with oral care of people who had a breathing tube. I'm speaking to people who maybe don't know these things. I know that you know this, but in this COVID ICU in New York, or maybe I shouldn't say that word, I'm sorry. In this ICU in New York, there were a number of times when clearly oral care had not been done on these intubated people. And I did see a lot of the ventilator associated pneumonia. And that's just one example of where, when people are not providing the very best medical care that they can, it can lead to really devastating outcomes that perhaps wouldn't have happened even with the virus on board. So, two things: when family's not there to help advocate, there are some nurses and other healthcare workers who are going to be more lazy. That's just a fact. So it's not just the humanity aspect of having someone there or hearing someone's voice who loves you, and perhaps that will help you heal, but there is also the medical aspect. If you have no one there advocating for you, there will be at least some times when the medical care you receive will not be as good. And I'm not putting down even the majority of providers, but or of healthcare workers. But that is going to happen if there's no one there to advocate for you. So that's another thing people need to keep in mind.
I 100% agree. And it might just be oversight too, if the nurses are busy or maybe they can't have someone else to come, but then there is an advocate in there ringing the call button or addressing things. And you need that in medicine right now. Conventional medicine in the hospital, it's a mess. Like I had to go in and advocate for a friend a couple weeks ago because there was some craziness going on. And I told that doctor some things and she was like, oh, she's like, you're right. And I'm like, where's your brain at? This isn't this isn't your first rodeo, or you just burn out, and I think that comes with a lot. Like, I'm sure during COVID, they were betting on, the person dying. And I see sometimes this sick humor in the emergency room and I just like shut it down because I'm not burnout at all. So I have compassion and, I'll sit in there with patients and talk to them. And it's the compassion. And that's when medicine becomes political and becomes a business, you're taking that compassion away. And it's sad because I don't even think in real time that nurses or doctors, they don't even realize it. They disassociate from the trauma.
Yes, I think that's true.
And that's why having family in there is nice. Like you said, you saw the pictures up there. Well, what if the grandchild was sitting there? Don't you think that nurse would have been in the room and, just being like, hey, yes, we're making her as comfortable as possible.
Yeah.
Like, her heart is going to start beating. She's do not resuscitate. It goes back like in the emergency room, family is welcome to whatever. If we're doing procedures, if we're coding, always have the family in there if they want to be. And I'm explaining to what happens. And I think we've lost that in medicine. We're just like entitled to, oh, that's our protocol. But why? Why do you have this protocol? Explain it to the family. If some administrator CEO is making up the protocols that they haven't practiced medicine for decades, they're just getting a phone call that this is the protocol.
Right.
That's that's pretty scary. So, back to when you were in California, why was that your last assignment? And, what did your family say about this whole journey?
So a lot of the reason was that I didn't plan to do this continually because I mean it was a stress on our whole family. And as much as I was glad that they were there with me, I still was not with them that much. I was working a lot of very long shifts. And yeah, so I wasn't with them a lot. So I think it was before that third contract that Tony and I decided this would be my last one, at least for the foreseeable future. So I'm pretty sure we had like solidly made that decision even before the contract started. But then that contract, I mean, I was slowly, opening my eyes more and more to things in the hospital and to the harm that public health policies were causing people. And it was scary, and it was really sad to see how most people didn't care. The rate of BMI increase among adolescents doubled at the beginning in like 2020 and 2021. That's not from the virus. That's from our public health policies in response to the virus. And yet there essentially was a lot of silence, or even calling someone a murderer, like we talked about before. If you thought, we need to be caring for our children, we can't just think we can shut them up at home and think that somehow they're going to be okay. A lot of children are not in healthy homes. And even in a healthy home, you need to be outside and active and all of these things. So anyway, I mean, that's just one of many, many harms that we caused. But as I was noticing both of these things, then that's when I was thrown into everything with remdesivir. And so that was even more eye-opening. And then it was during that contract that the mRNA shots rolled out. And I remember I came to work one day and all of a sudden there were cartoon superheroes on the walls of the employee staircases and the employee break room saying like, be a hero, get your dose. And right away I was like, that's fascinating. Be a hero. So we're just like, and at the time I wasn't even, so I was like very open, like, yeah, we'll see. Maybe, like I don't want anyone else to be getting this virus or dying from it. But right away I was like, we're jumping right to be a hero, not even protect yourself. Like we're assuming that me, who by the way had already had the virus, that me
I was going to
getting
ask you.
dose was going to not just somehow protect me, but going to protect others. Like that's a huge leap. And where are we making that leap? Right in a hospital. Like this should be an evidence-based place where we're asking questions, not making this huge leap. At the time, I naively never thought that it would become like vaccine passports like we had in Minnesota and many other places, or all of these other things. I didn't imagine that people would be angry at someone who had the virus still choosing to not get this new, therapy. But right away, I mean, that was very striking. So there were other stresses that made me very grateful to not be taking another contract, and grateful that like I didn't absolutely need to at that time. I really, did need to work for a while, but I was grateful that I could be home with my kids. And I tried to do a little research while I was working, but didn't, like I said, I was working a lot of really long shifts.
Yeah.
But definitely started researching more after. And that's when I really looked into IBM more and remdesivir more. And yes, I mean, I didn't actually personally administer the remdesivir, but I still wish that I would have looked into it more myself when I was working and could have advocated more there. And then I certainly looked into mRNA and other therapies. And that's when I even started to see studies already done on things like getting adequate sleep. I mean, the book, Eat, Sleep, Move,
Breathe. Yeah.
right? Those basics, like we have studies on tens of thousands of people showing adequate sleep, decreasing sugar intake, just decreasing sugary drinks, moving your body, that when you do those things, when you are infected with this virus that everyone is going to encounter at some point, you are less likely to have severe illness or death from it if you're just doing those basic things. And yet public health never talked about it. And that should have been obvious to me from the beginning, but it really took until that point when I was finally delving into studies, as you were at the beginning, when I finally was doing that. Why is public health not talking about this? Why do we have
Right.
such a camp 6 feet apart when it's an airborne virus and we're not talking about these basics? Like, you arm yourself, arm your children.
No one's making money off of it.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, well, I always argue, well, not argue. I try not to argue with people, but I slightly like bring this up sometimes to like pediatricians and stuff. And I'm like, do you ever talk about before the kids come in for their annual, checkup and shots? Do you talk to them about how a good night's sleep, there's data, it's actual, look it up on PubMed. It increases, the antibody response to the shot they're getting if they have a good night's sleep. So maybe you should be asking, did your kid get a good night's sleep? Were they up, whatever? They don't care. I don't even think they care if you get antibodies from it. They just want to hit
Like,
that list because they do get bonused from that. There's a pediatrician I know that was complaining because kids didn't go for their regular appointments, so they lost a bunch of bonuses that 2020. Yeah,
yeah,
that made me like sick to my stomach, by the way, because this isn't just a checklist. These are people's lives, and we're
yeah,
not all built the same, and we don't have the same responses to medications. We don't all have the same methylation.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think though the government was very smart on how they did it all, right? They created this terrible fear, and then that's how, they made us all comply to these weird things. And I remember, I'd be at Costco or remember going to places and they're like, you have to wear a mask. And I'm just like, but it's not an N95 fit tested mask. And that's the studies show you have to, even if a nurse took it off once during her shift, a fit
I would
tested N95, it increased your risk of respiratory pathogens. I maybe spoke about that study during a school board meeting. And I was like, you fit test my kid for an N95. You fit test all these kids and you have them not touch their mask, not take their mask off at all during the day.
entire day. So no eating, no drinking. For me at my shift, no coffee. And this is
Right.
why,
These are the
as
studies.
right. And those are the other things where, like, healthcare workers, myself included, should have been at the forefront of looking at that actual evidence rather than really lambasting people for even questioning, like, is a cloth mask on my child who's drooling, my young child who drools or chews on their mask, is that going to do anything? Is a wet cloth mask going to do anything against an airborne virus? And I'm kind of embarrassed at how long it took me to actually look into studies on these things. And yes, to find that it's really only going to be effective if it's fit tested N95, which is different than the KN95s that a lot of people wear. And I
Right.
think
That's my husband. He'd always be like, they think that they're getting protection with their K95 made from China.
and
Oh my goodness.
but yes, fit tested, but then you can't take it off. And I will tell you, I took mine off multiple times throughout the shift to eat almonds, drink water, and drink coffee, like for how I got through my shift. So how much protection was I even getting? Probably, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And these are the studies. This is science. And now, isn't it funny? I'm trying to decide like what they're doing with this because there's a big study that came out on microplastics and how it increases like arthritis, like
Yeah.
thrombotic effects. And I'm like, oh, because they're trying to blame all of these heart attacks on plastics now. It was funny, but anyway, those I would say to my kids, I made them all cloth masks to wear, under their nose or wear whatever because they're stupid. Not my kids, but because wearing the cloth was stupid. Because I'm like, but my one son, he loved the disposable ones. I'm like, but you're getting microplastics. Like, stop.
And
Uh,
this is the that again, I can't say this with any judgment, but we now have studies which I should have looked for in the beginning that actually over a long time, yes, it's not just this may have some potential benefit. There is also a potential risk that, again, most parents, including myself in the beginning, I mean, my kids didn't really have to wear them, but so we didn't really run into it other than like one flight. But we all should have been asking, is this causing harm? Is having something so close to your face that you're breathing, is that causing harm? And that is a very rational, evidence-based question that we weren't asking. So because I'm limited time and I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I have a few thoughts going forward, some like positive things that we can all do better. Do
yes,
you
I love that.
thoughts? Do you want me to share a couple thoughts I have? And then I'd love to hear more.
Yes. Yes.
Your
I want to hear what you have to say.
So some things that like Tony and I talk about a lot. One is truth and the reality of things really matters. And I think all of us can be bold about finding it. So I'll give one example related to this virus, the origin of the virus. Right away, and I'll say it was more Tony who looked into it and was like, I don't think this is natural for a few rational reasons. And then as they didn't find like the source animal and all of that, just even the fact that the Wuhan lab was right there, it just seemed more and more like the rational thing is to really question, did this come from the lab that's there? But there were some people who we personally know and love who literally said, like, you're racist to even question that. And that was very eye-opening. Like, wait, what? We're racist? Like the first people who died from this horrible thing were Chinese people. That is not racist to question were we, the US, were we funding this research in collaboration with probably other countries in Wuhan that led to this virus that is killing people and then all of these other horrible things and our reaction to it. But we need to be bold I mean, certainly none of us should ever be racist, but if we're asking a rational question that can actually help save lives and someone is trying to shut you down by saying something like that, we need to be bold. And I'm speaking to myself, but we need to be bold and say, oh, that absolutely is not in any way racist or conspiratorial to be questioning this. So we need to be bold in finding the actual reality of that. And then I think also addressing gain of function research in a legislative level so that things like this aren't happening. And then really, really, and this is something I try so hard to do, returning to basics of basic medical principles like doctor-patient relationship, do no harm, informed consent, like Sesame Street, even if these mRNA doses were saving everyone's lives from every horrible thing on earth, a Sesame Street character should not be advocating for them without sharing anything about the risk. That is not informed consent. Every therapeutic, including IBM, has some potential risk. And so to act as if there is none is horrible. At the very least, all of us in the medical community should have been like, whoa, 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 that's too far. That is not what we support. But there's hardly any outcry against that. So I hope that going forward, we can be better in that sense. And then really protecting the innocent among us, which you do a wonderful job of, just ways that every parent can try to help their children to be as healthy as possible for whatever potential, pathogen or other thing they come across in their lives, because we all will. So those are the first things that I think of.
I love it. Well, I think medical gaslighting is real. And I think it's weird if you question your doctor, or ask for things that maybe they don't know about, and then they gaslight you. I think that is a big red flag, and you can fire your doctor. They can fire you too. I saw a primary care doctor last year, and he won some award as like a good doctor in my area. And I'm like, that's funny because he fired me because I asked for a fasting insulin. I mean, I am kind of a pain. Well, because I was like, I want like my hormones to be checked so I can get a baseline because I'm 42. Anyway, so who cares? I was like, peace. And this medical gaslighting, I think if you're asking intelligent questions, there's no stupid question anyway. We teach our kids this. We're allowed to talk. We're allowed to talk things through. And that's why I love like doing podcasts and doing summits, and I'm talking to thought leaders and people that are using things that are maybe outside the box that will be normal in 20 years. Probiotics is a good example. Remember, you'd be a weirdo if you were taking probiotics 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's caught on mainstream. And isn't that the point, to be innovative? Isn't that why we live in America? But the problem is medicine has been politicized. It's all about money. It's about these big drug companies. And it's scary. It's really scary. I mean, the stories that I've heard and people have told me, some of them I can't even share. And you have to be your advocate. You have to be your best advocate. And if you have a question or you're uncertain about something, then ask for full informed consent. Ask for the mechanism of action of a drug, and if your doctor doesn't know it and they're prescribing it to you, or if they become defensive, then that's a problem. If they say, I'm actually not quite sure. I know it works well in the patients I've used it. There are side effects. but I will get back to you on that, or let's learn together. I mean, that means that they actually can grow. And a doctor that thinks they're a know-it-all, that's a red flag. So just really advocate for yourself, and, don't be afraid to speak out, because I'm sure with you speaking out, you've helped so many people, especially with the emotional trauma you've went through. So how have you recovered from this? You had mentioned you have 4 children now and you're homeschooling them. Can you tell us your location, or is it a safety issue? No, I'm just kidding.
We're in South Florida. And so we
Nice.
did from Minnesota to South Florida. And that's been good. Writing the book, it was incredibly difficult. Kudos to anyone who has written a book. Just so much work, but also therapeutic to work through these things and think through them. And I hope and pray really that it gives some voice and some kind of due honor to people who either died alone. It just basically to people who were harmed either by the virus or the public health response to it, whose lives weren't really in the mainstream. Like there were certain horrible stories that were amplified, and then there were others that were really just ignored. So I hope that it just kind of honors some of those people. And so in some sense that was therapeutic. Certainly prayer, and I think really back to basics, like prayer, sunshine, as silly as it sounds. That is one thing. And I'm in no way saying you can't be healthy in other places. You can. Thankfully, there's sun in other places. But for our family, being in South Florida really has been a gift. Like these past few months have been kind of pretty mild, and we've really been like craving the sun. Like it's a little too cool. And it's still been, 70s and fairly sunny, but we're like, where's the super hot, like warm sun, just kind of craving that. So that has been a gift to have that most days. And yeah, I really think a lot of basics, but
Yes. Well, keep sharing your story. I will have to introduce you to some other people that have podcasts to share your story. And we want to get the word out. Like you said, I think, the basis of your book is just asking questions. And then you were able to dig in and find those answers when you had time, because you were serving those in need and being that person that, was holding those hands of the people dying. I mean, you are just, that's such a blessing, and you're just so special for doing that. And we thank you for that. What?
well, I was saying it is, and it's horrible, but there is something really lucky to be the person in these horrible situations to provide at least a little bit of comfort. There is something to be like thankful for in that, as horrible as it is.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Leona, can you please tell us the name of your book? I think I mentioned it at the
Yeah.
beginning, and show us a picture for those watching, and I will link it in the show notes. And where can they find it?
So Travel Nurse is currently available only on Amazon. We will have it available from other more independent booksellers as soon as possible. But for now, Amazon, and called Travel Nurse. And Dr. Jen, thank you so much for your voice and your work and your time today. I appreciate it.
Yes, of course. And one more thing, you do speaking gigs too. If anyone out there would want to have you as a speaker, you're also available for that, correct?
Yeah, I would love that. That would be
Yeah.
awesome.
All right, awesome. Well, enjoy the Florida sun. It is
Thank
nice
you.
and gray here, which makes it great for the visual recording. It really looks nice,
This is
but
true.
it is gray here. So get some extra sun for me, some extra vitamin D.
I will.